I'm Patricia Mercer, 56 years old, and I spent 34 years in the United States Marine Corps. Rising from a second lieutenant, nobody in my family took seriously to a 3-star general. For 30 years, I let the people I loved most introduce me as the daughter who was off doing her little army thing, and I made myself smaller at their table than I was anywhere else on Earth. But the night a stranger tried to have me thrown out of a Pentagon Gala, and a room full of officers came to attention instead, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people you gave everything to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you are tuning in from. And if you have ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. For as long as I can remember, success in our family had a shape, and that shape was my sister. Lynn was 4 years older than me, and she did everything in the order the family understood. She was pretty in the way that made teachers gentle with her. She got the grades that earned praise but never worry. She married Gerald Bauer at 26, and the whole congregation nodded like a prophecy had come true. My mother cried. My father, who did not cry, shook Gerald's hand for a long time and called him son. I was the other one, the restless one, the girl who took apart the kitchen radio to see how the voices got inside it, who read the encyclopedia entries on aircraft carriers until the spines cracked, who told a guidance counselor at 15 that she wanted to do something that mattered and could not explain what she meant by it. My family loved me. I never doubted that. But they loved me the way you love a kite, holding the string and waiting for the wind to die down so they could reel me back to the ground where the sensible people stood. When I won a Navy ROTC scholarship my senior year, I thought they would be proud. I had earned my way into something hard. Instead, the dinner that night felt like a wake. My father set down his fork, my mother looked at her plate. Lynn, home from her first year of marriage, reached across the table and patted my hand like I had announced a diagnosis. "You'll get it out of your system, Patty," she said. "Everybody does." In our house, that was the whole argument. Never a fight, just the quiet certainty that whatever I had chosen was a phase, a weather system that would pass, and underneath it, the real Patricia would still be there, waiting to come home and be ordinary. I went anyway. I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the spring of 1992. The ceremony was small and bright, folding chairs on a parade field, a chaplain who spoke too long, and the particular smell of cut grass and shoe polish that I would come to associate with every important day of my life. My mother drove 4 hours by herself to be there. She wore her church dress. When the time came, her hands shook as she pinned the gold bars to my collar, and she whispered that my father had wanted to come, but the drive was hard on his back, which we both knew was not the reason. Lynn did not come. She sent a card. Inside was a $20 bill and a note in her round, careful handwriting. "For the bus home when you're done," it said. I kept that note for a long time. I told myself it was funny. It took me about 20 years to admit it was the first time my own sister had put a date on my failure before I had even begun. There's a particular loneliness to building a life that the people who made you cannot picture. My first real deployment came in the mid-1990s, and I remember writing letters home that I eventually stopped sending because I could not find the words that would mean anything across that distance. How do you explain to a family that measures a good week by a sale at the store what it feels like to be trusted with information that decides whether men come home? I did not have that vocabulary, and they did not have the ears for it, and so a silence grew between us that everyone mistook for me being too busy. I was not too busy. I was learning, slowly and without anyone noticing, to stop expecting them to understand. Each rank I earned twice. Once in front of the board that selected me, and once again in the quiet of my own chest, where I had to be my own audience because no one back home was clapping. I told myself this was fine. I told myself that strong people did not need an audience. It would take me most of my life to understand that needing to be seen by the people who raised you is not weakness. It is just being human. And I had been starving that human part of myself for so long I had mistaken the hunger for peace. The career that followed was the kind nobody back home could picture, so they did not try. I learned to celebrate alone. I made first lieutenant in a plywood office with a calendar from a tire company on the wall. I learned the intelligence trade, the long, unglamorous work of noticing the thing that did not fit and saying so before anyone else did. I missed Thanksgivings, I missed birthdays by oceans and time zones, and I sent gifts that arrived late and were opened, I was told, without me. There were promotions marked by a sheet cake somebody's spouse had baked, and phone calls home that dropped in the middle of my best news, and the slow understanding that the people who should have clapped the loudest had already turned to face a different stage. Only my mother kept watching. She did not understand half of what I did, and she said so plainly. But she kept a shoebox. I did not know about it for years. Inside were the clippings from the base newspaper, the photographs I had mailed, the orders and the citations folded along their creases. Every small proof that her younger daughter was becoming someone, collected by the one person who thought it was worth collecting. "I do not understand half of what you do, sweetheart," she told me once, late at her kitchen table with the box between us. "But I know what it costs you, and I have never once been anything but proud." I was a grown woman, an officer who had briefed colonels that month, and I had to look at the ceiling so I would not cry in front of my mother. That was the family I came from. One mother in the back of the room who never looked away. And everyone else, already turned, already certain, waiting for the wind to die down. It never did. The years have a way of taking a small habit and pressing it into stone. When Lynn and I were young, her teasing had at least been teasing. There was a wink in it, a sense that she knew she was needling me. Somewhere along the way, the wink disappeared, and what was left hardened into the family's official record. I was the absent one, the one who chose work over family, the one with the government job in Washington that nobody could quite explain, and so nobody tried. I would come home on leave, jet-lagged and glad to be there, and within an hour, Lynn would have set the frame for the whole visit. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular, sometime in the early 2000s. The table was full of cousins I barely saw, and Lynn was holding court at the center of it, the way she always did. A younger cousin asked me what I did, and before I could answer, my sister answered for me. "Pat's still doing her army thing," she said, smiling, getting the branch wrong, the way she always did. On purpose, I had decided years before. Honestly, I lose track. "Gerald, tell them about the new location." And just like that, the table turned, the way a school of fish turns, all at once and without a sound, toward Gerald and his second store. I sat there with my mouth half open, in a sentence I would never finish dissolving on my tongue. It was never one big wound. It was 1,000 small subtractions, and I had stopped keeping the ledger out loud, because saying it out loud only ever made me the difficult one. The worst of it, looking back, was the promotion. In the year 2018, I was selected for Brigadier General. 1 star. For a Marine intelligence officer, for a woman of my year group, that selection was the work of a lifetime, and the long odds finally breaking my way. I called home that evening with my heart going like a girl's. My mother wept and asked me to spell it out so she could write it down. Then I called Lynn. "That is nice, Patty," she said. I could hear a television behind her. "Listen, while I have you, what do you think is reasonable for a band these days? For Megan's reception, people are quoting me numbers that are insane." I told her what I thought was reasonable for a band. I stood in my kitchen in Virginia, a 1-star general in the United States Marine Corps, and I helped my sister price a wedding band. And when I hung up, I sat down on the floor with my back against the cabinets and laughed until it was not laughing anymore. I did not tell my mother that part, about sitting on the kitchen floor. When I called her back the next day, she had already written my new rank on the calendar in the kitchen, in her careful hand, and circled it. And she asked me 3 separate times to explain what a brigadier general did so she could tell the women at her church correctly. That was the difference between them, my mother and my sister, distilled into a single afternoon. One of them wanted to get my life right so she could carry it proudly to other people. The other wanted to get it wrong, just slightly, just enough, so that it would never quite outshine her own. For years I had told myself the difference did not matter, that I was loved by both in their own ways. Sitting on that floor, I let myself feel, for just a moment, how much it actually did matter, and then I got up and washed my face and went back to being the person who did not let such things matter. The reprieve was temporary. They always were, back then. Gerald did his part too. Gerald had a speech he liked to give after his second drink, usually at a backyard gathering, usually with one arm slung over the back of a lawn chair. He would explain to me, the career officer, what real leadership was. "No offense, Pat, he would start, which is how every insult in my family began. But anybody can climb a ladder when the rungs are bolted in for you. The Marines hand you the next rank if you just do not quit. Try meeting a payroll. Try lying awake wondering if you can make rent for 14 employees. That is leadership. I never argued with Gerald. There is no winning an argument with a man who believes the thing he most needs to believe. I would nod and sip my drink and think about the 18-year-olds whose lives had once depended on whether I read a satellite image correctly, and I would let him have his lawn chair and his certainty. It was easier. Easier had become my whole strategy at home, and I did not yet understand what it was costing me. The lowest moment, though it did not feel like the lowest at the time, came in 2013 when our father died. I flew home from an overseas posting on emergency leave, 30-some hours of airports and connections, and I arrived at the funeral home still in the clothes I had traveled in, hollowed out and grieving. I had loved my father, even though he never quite knew what to do with me. At the service, the director asked the family if anyone wanted to say a few words, and before I could gather myself, Lynn stood. She spoke beautifully about him, about the man of the house, about the daughter who had stayed close and tended to him. She thanked the people who had been there. And then she said, and I will never forget it, that she knew their father would have wanted everyone to know how proud he was of his girls, both of them, even the one who was always off somewhere. Even the one who was always off somewhere. I sat in the front pew, jet-lagged and newly fatherless, and I understood that even at his funeral, I was a footnote in my sister's eulogy, the daughter who was off somewhere, as if I had been at a spa for 2 decades, instead of serving the country he had quietly, in his stiff way, respected. I did not say anything. I held my mother's hand, but something in me went very quiet that day, and stayed quiet for a long time. There was one bright thread in all of it, and it ran back to my mother. She was in her early 80s now, slower, her hands not quite steady, but her mind sharp as a tack. One spring afternoon, she said something that would change the shape of the next year of my life. "I would like to see it once," she said. "Your Washington, where you work, before my knees decide for me." She looked at me with those clear eyes. "I have read about it for 30 years out of a shoebox. I would like to stand in it, just the once." So when the invitation came, I knew exactly who I wanted in the room. The invitation was for a Veterans Foundation Gala, black tie, held inside the Pentagon that spring. The foundation supported Gold Star families, and I had been asked to give brief remarks. It was an honor, and it was also, I realized as I held the heavy cream envelope, my chance. 3 guest seats. I would bring my mother to see my Washington at last. And I would bring Lynn because some stubborn, hopeful part of me still believed that if she could just see it, really see it, the 30 years might finally turn. The evening of the gala, I made a decision I would think about for a long time afterward. The event was civilian black tie. I could have worn my dress uniform, my stars on my shoulders where no one could mistake them. Instead, I wore a gown, a borrowed one, deep navy, because I was not attending as a general that night. I was attending as a daughter, bringing her mother to see something beautiful, and as a sister, holding out one more open hand. I have walked the halls of that building in uniform for 2 years. That night I walked them in a gown on my mother's arm, and I learned how small a change it takes to make a person disappear. We came in through the visitor's entrance, through the security I knew by heart, and I watched my mother's face tip up at the height of the corridors, the flags, the polished floors that threw the light back like water. Lynn walked a half step behind, and for once she was quiet, taking it in, until the old instinct caught up with her. "Are you sure we are allowed up here, Patty?" she said, eyeing the crowd ahead, the dignitaries, the dark suits, and the gowns. "It looks important. It looks like the kind of place that checks." "We are allowed," I said. "I promise." I had been in that building on its worst mornings and its most ordinary ones, had badged through its turnstiles before dawn with a coffee going cold in my hand, had briefed people whose names you would know in rooms you will never see. But a building does not recognize you. A building only reflects back whatever you are wearing, and that night I was wearing a gown and the role of a daughter, and so the building, and the people who policed its edges, saw a daughter and nothing more. I remember thinking, even before anything happened, how strange it was to feel like a guest in a house I helped run. I studied my mother over the threshold, and I scanned the crowd out of habit, The old intelligence reflex, reading the room, noting the clusters of rank, the nervous aides, the photographers. I clocked the young captain at the rope before he clocked me, and some quiet part of me, the part that has kept me steady in worse places than a reception, noted the tightness in him, the way his eyes kept darting to the 4-star, the way a man looks when he has been handed responsibility he is afraid of dropping. I should have known. I have spent my life reading exactly that kind of fear. I just did not expect it to be aimed at me. The reception was gathered in a wide marble hall, a receiving line forming along a velvet rope toward the evening's hosts. A visiting 4-star had drawn a knot of attention near the front, and the air had that particular charge of a room with too much rank and not enough space. I steered my mother gently toward the line, looking for Karen Aldrich, the vice admiral hosting the evening, who had told me to find her the moment I arrived. That was when the young captain found me first. He was an army officer, 28 at most, in dress blues, with an aide-de-camp's gold cord looped at his shoulder. He had the tight, anxious energy of a junior man who has been put in charge of a rope and a 4-star's comfort and has decided the two are the same job. He had been scanning the crowd, and his eyes snagged on me. A woman in a gown standing too close to the front of his line, with an elderly woman on her arm and no escort he recognized. I saw the decision form on his face before he spoke. I had made a career out of reading faces, and his was easy. He had filed me under problem. "Ma'am, this area is for the official party," he said, stepping into my path. His voice was pitched to carry, the way you talk when you want the people around you to see you handling something. "I am going to have to ask you to step back." "I am part of the official party," I said quietly. "I am looking for Admiral Aldrich." It was the wrong answer for him or the right one. A woman he did not recognize, claiming to belong. Something in him decided I was exactly the kind of mistake an aide is supposed to catch. He turned his head toward the nearest military policeman, a broad staff sergeant standing easy near the rope, and he raised his hand and snapped his fingers, twice, the way you call a waiter. "Remove her," he said. "She does not belong in this line." The hall did not go silent, but a pocket of it did. The people nearest us turned. I felt my mother's hand tighten on my arm. And just behind me, I heard my sister make a small sound, not quite a word, something between a breath and a laugh, the sound of a person who has been waiting 30 years to be proven right and has just watched it happen in marble and gold. The military policeman did not move quickly. He was older than the captain, steadier, a staff sergeant with the calm of a man who has diffused more situations than he has caused. His name tape read, Friel. He stepped over and he looked at me, and there was nothing unkind in his face. He had a job, and the job had rules, and the rules did not care what anyone barked. "Ma'am," he said, polite, even gentle, "I am going to need to see some identification." Behind me, Lynn leaned toward our mother and murmured, just loud enough, "I told her this would happen." I did not say anything. I have learned that the quietest move is almost always the strongest one. I opened the small clutch I was carrying, and I took out my military identification card, and I placed it in Staff Sergeant Friel's hand. He looked down at it. I watched him read the first line, and then the rank, and then read it again, the way a man reads a word he was not expecting in a sentence he thought he understood. His thumb moved across the card as if to make sure it was real. The easy calm went out of his posture, and something else came into it. Something straighter and older than the moment. He took one step back. He brought his heels together. And Staff Sergeant Marcus Friel, United States Army, came to attention in the middle of that marble hall and held my identification card out flat on his palm like it was something that ought to be returned with both hands. "Lieutenant General," he said. "Ma'am, my apologies." I heard the words land on the captain like a slow wave. Lieutenant General. I watched him replay the last 60 seconds behind his eyes, the snap of his fingers, the order, the woman in the gown he had filed under problem. The color went out of his face in a way I had only ever read about. He opened his mouth, and nothing came out of it. I want to tell you what it is like to stand in a moment you have, in some buried way, waited your whole life for, and to feel almost nothing of what you expected. There was no triumph in me. The marble hall had gone strange and slow, the chandelier light pooling on the floor, the nearby conversations dropping away one by one as people realized something was happening and turned to watch. I was aware of my mother's grip on my arm, of the slight tremor in it, of the way she was looking up at me with an expression I could not yet read. I was aware of Staff Sergeant Friel holding his position, steady as a post, his earlier ease replaced by something formal and protective. And I was aware, most of all, of the young captain, of how completely his face had collapsed, and of the fact that the thing rising in me was not satisfaction at his humiliation, but a strange, tired tenderness. Because I had worn that exact expression myself, the expression of a person realizing too late that they have badly misjudged someone more times than I could count. I knew that face from the inside. It is not a comfortable thing to recognize your own oldest wound on the face of the person who just handed it to you again. That was when Karen Aldrich arrived, cutting through the crowd in her own dress uniform, 3 stars of her own on her shoulders, her face breaking into a smile when she saw me. "Pat," she said warmly, taking my free hand in both of hers. "There you are. I was starting to think you had gotten lost in my building." Then she registered the tableau, the MP at attention, the captain the color of paper, and her smile cooled by precise degrees. "Captain," she said, "this is Lieutenant General Patricia Mercer, United States Marine Corps. She is our guest of honor tonight. She is giving the remarks you are here to help me introduce." "General," the captain managed. I did not, ma'am. I am so sorry. I did not realize." And here's the thing I had never been able to explain to my family. The thing 30 years of small subtractions had taught me without my noticing. I was not angry at him. He was 28, terrified, trying to do a job nobody had trained him to do well, and he had made the oldest mistake there is, deciding who someone was by looking at them. I had been on the other end of that mistake my whole life. I knew exactly how cheap it was, and exactly how much it cost. "It is all right, Captain," I said. I kept my voice even and low, only for him. "I should have worn my stars. You were watching the line. That is your job." I turned to the staff sergeant, who was still at attention. "Sergeant Friel, thank you. At ease. Would you do me a favor and help my mother to her seat? She has come a long way to be here, and her knees have opinions about marble." Friel's face cracked into something close to gratitude. "It would be my honor, ma'am." And I turned finally to look at my sister. Lynn had gone pale. The small, triumphant sound she had made was long gone. She was staring at me the way you stare at a familiar room in which someone has suddenly moved every piece of furniture, like she did not know where to put her hands or her eyes. I had imagined 100 times what it might look like the day my family finally saw me. I never once imagined it would be in a marble hallway with a stranger's hand still warm on my shoulder, and my sister looking at me like she had never met me in her life. The drive home was the quietest hour I have ever spent with my mother and my sister in a car together. My mother held my hand across the console the whole way, saying nothing, her thumb moving slowly over my knuckles. Lynn sat in the back. For most of the drive, she said nothing at all, which from Lynn was its own kind of statement. Then somewhere on the highway, with the light sliding over us, she found her footing again and reached for the only tool she had ever trusted. "Well," she said, "that was dramatic. He was only doing his job, you know." I did not answer. My mother did. "Lynette," her voice was tired and final, "stop talking." And Lynn, who had not been told to stop talking by our mother since she was a teenager, stopped. Later, alone in my apartment, I could not sleep. I sat by the window with the city going quiet below me, and I waited to feel the thing I had expected to feel. The vindication, the warm closing of a door. It did not come. Instead, I kept seeing 2 faces, and I was surprised by which one bothered me more. The captain's face barely registered. He had not known me. He had an excuse, the best excuse there is: ignorance. My sister had known me for 56 years. She had stood beside me and watched a sergeant come to attention for me, and the first thing out of her mouth had been a defense of the man who tried to throw me out. That was the wound, not the stranger. The person who had every reason to know better and chose, even then, the smallest possible version of me. Around midnight, I called the one person who would tell me the truth instead of the comfortable thing. Joan Petrie had been my commanding officer 2 decades and a lifetime ago, a retired colonel now, the kind of friend who has seen you cry in a tent and never once mentioned it again. She picked up on the second ring because Joan has never once been asleep when I needed her, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she laughed softly, not unkindly. "Pat," she said, "do you hear what you're telling me? You are upset that a room full of officers stood up for you." "I am upset that it took a room full of officers for my own sister to look at me." "Right," Joan said. "And there it is." She let it sit. "Listen to me. Those people stood up for the stars. You have had the stars for years. The Marines have known exactly who you are for a very long time. The question was never whether the institution sees you. It is whether you are still standing around waiting on a handful of people who decided, a long time ago, not to. And from where I am sitting, you have been waiting at that particular bus stop since 1992, with your sister's $20 bill still in your pocket." I did not say anything. Outside, a siren rose and faded. "You want to know what I think?" Joan went on, because Joan always knew when I wanted her to keep going. "I think you have been carrying two careers your whole life. The one the Marines see, where you are exactly who your record says you are. And a second one, an invisible one, where every leave and every holiday you go home and start over from zero. A private trying to convince the same skeptical board that she is worth a second look. And that second board was never going to promote you, Pat. It was rigged before you were born. You cannot win a fitness report from people who decided your grade when you were a child." I told her that was a depressing way to put it. "It is not depressing," she said. "It is freeing if you let it be. The day you stop submitting that invisible packet is the day you get all that energy back. You have been spending a general's worth of strength trying to make a handful of people in one zip code take you seriously. And they were never the mission. They were just the people who happened to be standing nearby when you were small. You built a life they cannot even describe," Joan said, gentler now. "That is not your failure, but spending it auditioning for them, that one is on you, friend. With love." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I had spent my whole life being smaller at my family's table than I was anywhere else on earth. I had walked into rooms where men with decades on me listened when I spoke. And then I had driven to my mother's house and let my brother-in-law explain leadership to me from a lawn chair, because keeping the peace had always seemed worth the price. I was beginning to understand that the peace I had been buying was not peace at all. It was just my silence, dressed up in good manners. I decided, sitting there at my kitchen counter at 1 a.m, that the silence was over. Not loudly, I am not a loud person. But that table was going to have to meet the rest of me, the whole size of me, or it was going to have to do without. I did not call in anger. I waited 3 days until I was sure my voice would be level, and then I called her on a Sunday afternoon. "I want to talk about the gala," I said. "Oh, Pat, not this again." I could hear her settling in for a fight, the old reflexes. "It was a misunderstanding. The boy made a mistake. Why are you determined to turn it into something?" "I am not talking about the captain," I said. "I forgave the captain that night. I am talking about you." I kept my voice steady. "You watched a sergeant come to attention for me, and the first words out of your mouth were that the man who tried to remove me was only doing his job. 30 years, Lynn. 30 years of introducing me as still doing my army thing, of getting the branch wrong on purpose, of turning every single thing I have ever accomplished into a setup for one of Gerald's stories. I am not asking you to salute me. I am asking you to stop pretending I am small." There was a silence on the line. When she spoke, her voice had gone tight and high. "So now I am the bad guy," she said, "because some kid embarrassed himself in a hallway. Wonderful. This is wonderful. I bring you nothing but support, and now I am the villain. You have never once asked me what I do," I said. "In 30 years. Not once. Because you act like it is all so secret. How am I supposed to ask about something you will not even explain?" "You could have started with the question," I said. "I would have found a way to answer it." She hung up. Not dramatically. She just said she had to start dinner and the line went dead, and I stood there in my kitchen and felt, underneath the hurt, something I had not expected. Relief. I had finally said the true thing out loud, and the sky had not fallen. It had only gotten quiet. Gerald called the next evening, which I had known he would. Gerald was the family's diplomat, by which I mean he was the one sent to restore the old order whenever I disturbed it. Pat, he said in the warm, reasonable voice he used for closing deals. I think you and Lynn just need to take a breath. You are a big deal out there. Nobody's saying otherwise. But in this family, we do not make your mother cry over a coat check mix-up. Just call your sister, smooth it over, and we can all move on. My mother is not crying, Gerald, I said. I spoke to her this morning. She is doing fine. That stopped him for a second. He had not expected me to check. Well, he recovered. All I am saying is, keep the peace. For the family. I have kept the peace for 30 years, I said. I am done keeping it by disappearing. If the family wants peace with me, the price is that you all stop talking about me like I am a hobby that got out of hand. That is the whole price. It is not a high one. He did not know what to do with that. Gerald had never in his life been quoted a price he could not negotiate. He muttered something about everyone needing to cool off and got off the phone, and I imagine he reported back to Lynn that I was being unreasonable, because that is the word my family has always reached for when I declined to make myself convenient. What surprised me in those days after I drew the line was how physical the relief was. I had expected guilt. I had been trained from childhood to feel guilt whenever I disrupted the family's comfort. The way you flinch from a hot stove, automatically and without thinking. The guilt came, but underneath it was something I had not felt in years, a loosening in my chest, like setting down a rucksack I had carried so long I had stopped noticing its weight. I slept better that week than I had in months. I caught myself humming in the car. I realized that the constant low effort of managing my family's perception of me, of choosing my words at every gathering so as not to seem like I was bragging, of shrinking preemptively so no one would have to shrink me, had been running in the background of my life like a program I could not close, draining me without my knowledge. And now it was off. The quiet it left behind was enormous. The person who surprised me was my mother. I drove out to see her that weekend, braced for her to ask me to apologize, to keep the family whole the way mothers do. Instead, when I sat down at her kitchen table, she got up without a word, went to the hall closet, and came back with the shoebox. She set it down between us and took the lid off. It was fuller than I remembered. On top, fresh, was the program from the Gala, my name printed inside it under the words, Guest of Honor. I have kept every one of these, she said, because somebody in this family had to. Her voice did not shake. I am not upset with you, Patricia. I am upset with myself. I let it go on for 30 years. I let your sister write the story, and I stayed quiet at that table, same as you did, because it was easier, and you were so far away, and I told myself you were strong enough not to need us. That was a coward's comfort. I am too old for it now. She put her hand flat on top of the box, the way you put your hand on a Bible. I am just sorry it was only ever me, and only ever in a shoebox, and never out loud where it would have done you some good. I held my mother's hand on top of 30 years of clippings, and for the first time in my adult life, I let myself be the daughter and let her be the one who was sorry. The family went cold around us. Cousins who heard a version of the story from Lynn went quiet. An aunt sent a pointed text about humility. I let it all happen. Peace, in my family, had always meant my silence. I was learning, late, the difference between peace and a held breath. Here is something I did not expect. When you stop playing your part in a story, the story cannot hold its old shape, because it was leaning on you the whole time. For 30 years, my sister had been the family's narrator. She was the one who told the cousins what I was up to, who set the frame at every gathering, who decided in advance what kind of evening it was going to be. The night a stranger called me by my rank in front of dignitaries, she lost the pen. She did not know it yet. But the story had slipped out of her hands and into 100 others, and those others were asking questions she could not answer. It started small. A cousin I had not spoken to in years sent me a message. Someone had told her about the Gala, the real version, the one where the Pentagon stood up. She wrote that she had always wondered what I really did and never felt she was allowed to ask. Then another message, from an uncle. Then a former neighbor who had seen a photograph somewhere. Each one was a small crack in the wall Lynn had spent 3 decades building. The wall that kept me filed under harmless. The one that undid me was my niece, Lynn's daughter, Megan, the one whose wedding band I had once priced over the phone. She called me on a Tuesday night, and her voice was careful, like she was opening a door she had been told to leave shut. "Aunt Pat," she said, "Mom always made it sound like you were just away." Like you had a desk job somewhere and you were too busy for us." She paused. "And then my friend's dad, he is a colonel, he heard my last name, and he asked if I was related to General Mercer, and the way he said it. Aunt Pat, the way he said your name. Nobody ever told me you were this. Why did nobody tell me?" I did not have a clean answer for her. I told her the truth, which was that the family had its way of talking about me and I had stopped fighting it a long time ago. And that was on me as much as anyone. She was quiet. Then she said something that has stayed with me. "I think I want to do something that matters," she said. "Like you did. I never thought I was allowed to want that. I thought that was the thing we were not supposed to want." I thought about myself at 15, telling a guidance counselor I wanted to do something that mattered and not being able to explain it, and I had to steady my voice before I answered her. I sat with my niece's words for days afterward. I thought that was the thing we were not supposed to want. It landed on me how far the damage had traveled, past me, into a generation that had watched my erasure and quietly absorbed its lesson. That ambition of a certain kind was something the Mercer women did not reach for. That wanting to matter beyond the family was a betrayal dressed up as a phase. My whole life, I had thought I was the only casualty of the story Lynn told. I had not understood that the story was a fence, and that other girls in the family had been standing behind it too, looking out at a field they had been taught was not for them. If the only thing that came out of that marble hallway was that my niece felt allowed to want a larger life, then the captain who tried to throw me out had, without meaning to, done my family a service none of us could have managed on our own. I called Megan back the next week, and we talked for 2 hours about what a service path could look like. And I heard in her voice something I recognized, the particular excitement of a person discovering a door they had assumed was a wall. Gerald felt the shift before he understood it. At a family barbecue that summer, the one I did not attend but heard about in detail, he started into one of his speeches, the real leadership one. And partway through, he realized the table had drifted. People were not asking him about the new location anymore. They were asking, had anyone talked to Pat? Was it true about the Pentagon? What exactly did a Marine general do all day? Someone told me Gerald set down his burger and said, to no one in particular, "Since when does everyone want to hear about the Pentagon?" Nobody answered him. They were already asking the next question. And Lynn. Lynn was alone with it in a way she had never been alone with anything. She had built her whole sense of herself on a comparison. The accomplished sister and the absent one, the real life and the phase, and the comparison had quietly reversed while she was not looking. She called me one evening, and it was not an apology, not yet. It was something more raw than that, a person feeling around in the dark for a wall that used to be there. "Everyone keeps asking me what you do," she said. There was no edge in it, which frightened me more than any edge would have. And I realized, standing in my own kitchen, that I genuinely do not know. I have a sister who is a general, and I cannot tell a single person at a barbecue what that means. Isn't that something? Isn't that just something? I did not gloat. There was nothing in me that wanted to. I had spent too long on the receiving end of that exact feeling, the feeling of being the one who does not count, to wish it on her now that the wheel had turned. "It is not too late to ask," I said. She did not answer, but she did not hang up either, and we sat there on the line for a moment in a silence that was not comfortable, but was, for the first time in our lives, honest. It took her 2 weeks to ask. She called and said she would like to come see me, just her, no Gerald, and could she take me to lunch? I said yes. We met at a small place halfway between us, a cafe with bad coffee and good light, and she sat down across from me with her hands folded on the table like a woman in a waiting room. "I am not here to argue," she said before I could speak. "I am not here to defend myself. I have done enough of that for one lifetime." She took a breath. "I am here because I would like you to tell me who you are, what you actually do, all of it, if you are willing. I should have asked 30 years ago. I am asking now." It was the first genuine question my sister had ever asked me about my life, and I almost could not speak for a moment. Then I told her. I told her about the intelligence trade, about Iraq in 2004, about the night I looked at a pattern nobody else thought was a pattern and made a call that turned a convoy around, and how I learned weeks later what had been waiting on the road we did not take. I told her what it costs to be the person who has to say the frightening thing out loud and be right. I told her about the 18-year-olds. I told her things I had never told anyone in the family, because no one in the family had ever asked. She listened. She did not interrupt. At one point, her eyes filled, and she pressed her napkin to them and waved at me to keep going, and I kept going. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I made you small," she said finally, "so I would not have to feel how big you were getting. That is the truth I have been running from. While I was being a wife and a mother, doing everything right, everything I was supposed to, my baby sister was out there becoming someone the world stands up for. And every time you grew, I shrank in my own head, and I could not stand it. So I made you the one who was away, the one who missed things, the one with the little army job. It was the only way I knew how to keep being the big sister." She looked at me. "I was so afraid that if you were somebody, it meant I was nobody. I have been afraid of that our whole lives." I let her words sit between us because they deserved to. "I stopped telling you things," I said, "because every time I did, you made them smaller, and I told myself I was keeping the peace. But the truth is, I was protecting the best parts of my life from the person most likely to belittle them. That is not nothing, Lynn. You do not get to hear that and have it cost you nothing." "I know," she said. "I do not want it to cost me nothing." We talked for a long time after that, longer than we had talked in years, maybe ever. She asked about the things she had spent 3 decades not asking. She wanted to know if I had ever been afraid, and I told her the truth, that I had been afraid almost constantly, and had simply learned to work while afraid, which is the only kind of courage I have ever actually witnessed. She asked whether I resented her, and I told her that resentment was too small a word, that what I had felt was closer to grief, the grief of having a sister and missing her at the same time, of mourning someone who was still alive and sitting across from me at every holiday. That landed hard. She put her face in her hands for a moment. When she looked up, she said she had felt the same grief from the other side and had never let herself name it, because naming it would have meant admitting she had thrown something precious away on purpose. We were 2 women, one in her 50s and one in her 60s, finally saying out loud what we had each known and hidden since we were girls. I did not forgive her in that cafe. I want to be honest about that because the easy version of the story would have us hugging in the good light with the bad coffee, all the years dissolved. That is not what happened. Forgiveness like ours is not a moment, it is a direction, and what we did in that cafe was turn, slowly, painfully, to face the same way for the first time. I told her my terms, and they were simple. Honesty, no more rewriting, no more introductions that shave me down to fit her comfort, and time. A lot of time to see if the turn would hold. She agreed to all of it. And then she paid for the bad coffee, which, if you knew my sister, you would understand was its own small revolution. The seasons turned, and the change between my sister and me did not announce itself. It showed up in small things, the way real change always does. She called and asked questions and listened to the answers. She corrected a cousin, once, who referred to my army job, and the cousin reported it to me, astonished. We were not fixed, but the weather between us had changed and you could feel it. The captain came back into the story in a way I did not expect. About a month after the gala, a letter reached my office, formal, handwritten, on plain paper. Captain Derek Stahl. He wrote that he had no excuse, that he had acted on assumption instead of on duty, that he understood I would be within my rights to end his career and that he would not contest it if I did. He wrote that he thought about that hallway every single day. I could have ended him with one phone call. A 3-star's displeasure travels fast and lands hard, and a younger version of me, the one who kept a $20 bill in her pocket as a private grievance, might have been tempted to let it. But I had spent a lifetime on the wrong end of people deciding who I was at a glance. And I knew the difference between a man who is cruel and a man who is careless and is ashamed of it. So I wrote him back. I told him I would not be filing anything. I told him the lesson he was probably taking from that night was the wrong one, that he was probably resolving to check identification more aggressively, to trust people less, to assume the worst faster. The real lesson, I wrote, was the exact opposite. The person standing in front of you might be precisely the one you would never expect. Lead with that, I told him. and you will be a better officer than the night made you feel." I never heard back, but I did not need to. The letter was not for him in the end. It was the last thing I needed to prove to myself about who I had decided to be. I have thought a great deal since that night about what it means to have power and to choose not to use it on someone who has wronged you. For most of my life, I imagined that the satisfying ending to my story would be a reckoning the moment the people who dismissed me were forced to feel the full weight of their mistake. The gala gave me a version of that, and I learned almost at once that the reckoning is the least nourishing meal there is. Watching the captain go pale fed nothing in me. Declining to end his career, though, choosing mercy when cruelty was free and available, that did something. It told me, in a way no promotion ever had, exactly who I had become when no one was making me be anyone. The measure of a person, I have decided, is not the rank on their shoulder or the room that stands when they enter. It is what they do with the small, quiet power to ruin someone on an ordinary afternoon when ruining them would cost nothing and no one would ever blame them for it. My mother had a small health scare that autumn. Nothing in the end, a night in the hospital and a fright. But it reordered things the way those nights do. Lynn and I sat in the same waiting room, drinking the same terrible vending machine coffee, and we handled it together, dividing the calls and the logistics without friction, like two people who had finally remembered they were on the same team. When my mother was settled and the danger had passed, she looked at the two of us standing at the foot of her bed, and she laughed, a small, dry laugh. "Look at the two of you," she said. "Took 83 years and a marble hallway. But look at you." I drove home from the hospital, thinking about the gala, turning it over the way you worry a stone in your pocket. I used to think the reveal was the moment the room stood up. The drama of it, the marble, the captain going white, the sergeant at attention. But I was beginning to understand that the room standing up was never the real reveal. The real reveal was quieter, and it had happened inside me, somewhere on the highway home, when I finally stopped needing my family's awe to believe my own life had been real. The room had only ever been confirming something that was already true. I had just been the last one to accept it. In the late winter, another envelope arrived, heavy and cream, and I knew it before I opened it. The foundation was asking me to host the next year's gala. 3 guest seats again, the letter said. For family. I held it for a long time. A year before, I would have known instantly who to bring, would have grabbed at the chance to make Lynn see, to win something. Now I let myself sit with a better question. Not who do I want to impress? Who has earned the chair? The following spring I walked into that same marble hall, and this time I wore my stars. I did not wear them to be safe from another captain. I wore them because I had finally stopped apologizing for the size of my own life. And the uniform was simply the truth of it, the same truth that had been there in the gown a year before. Only now I was the one who insisted on it. My mother came on my arm, slower than the year before, but upright, her eyes shining as she took in the building she had read about out of a shoebox for 30 years. At the door she stopped and squeezed my arm. "I told you I would see it once," she said. "I am so glad I waited for the good seat." I walked her in, slowly, matching my pace to hers, and we stopped just inside the hall so she could look at all of it. The flags, the high windows, the officers in their dress uniforms moving through the light. She did not say anything for a while. She had spent 30 years assembling me out of paper, out of clippings and photographs in a shoebox in a hall closet, and now she was standing inside the thing those scraps had only ever hinted at. I watched her take it in, and I understood that this, more than any salute, was the moment I had actually been working toward without knowing it. Not the room recognizing me, but my mother getting to stand in the world her faith had been pointed at for 3 decades. She had believed in a country she had never seen me serve in. Now she was in it. I think a person can wait a whole life for the right witness, and I had been lucky enough, late, but not too late, to bring mine into the room while she could still see it. Lynn came too. She had earned the chair in the long, unglamorous way that earning actually happens, 1,000 small additions to undo 1,000 small subtractions. And partway through the evening, I watched her do something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. A foundation board member, a stranger, asked who she was, and my sister, who had spent 30 years getting my branch wrong on purpose, stood up a little straighter and said it plainly. "This is my sister," she said. Lieutenant General Patricia Mercer, United States Marine Corps. She's hosting tonight." She paused and added, "Only for me." She's also the reason I finally figured out what I was so afraid of my whole life, and I am done being afraid of it. There was a young captain working the line that night too, a different one, anxious and earnest, and when our eyes met, I gave him a small nod, and he relaxed, and I thought of Derek Stahl and hoped he had read my letter twice. I made a point of stopping to thank him on my way out, by name, and I watched him stand a little taller, and I thought about how cheap kindness is, and how rarely we spend it on the people who are only trying not to fail. I want to talk to you now, whoever you are, if you have been the one in your family who was filed under harmless. If you have spent years waiting for the people who knew you first to finally see you, the parent, the sibling, the old friend who decided who you were before you had finished becoming it. Hear me, their recognition, when it finally comes, is a gift. It is a good thing, and you are allowed to want it. But it is not a verdict on your worth, and it never was. You did not become someone the night the room stood up. You were already her. You were her in the plywood office and on the dropped phone calls and at the table where you made yourself small to keep a peace that was only ever your own silence. You were always her. The day you stop waiting for the room to stand is the day you finally do. And the strangest, sweetest thing, the thing nobody tells you, is that once you are standing on your own, you find you have room in your arms again for the people who are ready to do the work of finding their way back to you. I walked into that bright hall on my own terms, my mother on one arm and my sister at my side. And for the first time in 57 years, I did not need anyone's permission to be there. Neither do you. You never did. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this one. I think about that marble hallway often, not because of the captain, but because of how long I waited for my own family to see what a room full of strangers saw in an instant. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been the one in your family who got filed away as harmless? The one whose work nobody could quite explain? Did the people who knew you first ever finally see you, and did anything change when they did? And if you had been standing where I was, holding out your ID in that hallway, do you think you could have forgiven the young man who barked at you? I would love to read your answers. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and tell me, and if you are not already here with us, hit subscribe.